Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition here of the GSMC Deadball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name, as always, is your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on this lovely Friday afternoon and to conclude the week. We should have a great show to kickstart your very sports-filled weekend, starting off by previewing the last two divisional round games in both the NFC and AFC that we didn't get to, the Rams and the Eagles in the NFC, and then the popcorn-worthy event of the weekend, Bills-Ravens over in the AFC. Then we're going to be kind of talking some CFP championship game stuff, talking about the most important players, the top five taking place in the CFP championship. Previewing another big game. It always seems to be a big game out west in the NBA. The Thunder taking on the Mavs after drastically different stretches and streaks in the past couple of weeks for both teams. And then conclude today's show with the bizarre rumors concerning Elon Musk and Liverpool FC. We'll be bringing all updates in that regard as well. But before we get into the show, as always, like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network if you haven't done so already and you want to keep up to date with all of our new content, not just with my show, but other shows around the network. But if you want to contribute and interact with our shows a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way, as always, to get your input and opinions out on air. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned here at the network, and it just makes our shows that much better. And you, our faithful audience, are a big part of what makes this network go. But without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment, breaking down the first of two divisional round games we'll be talking about and previewing today over in the NFC. The Rams going up against the Eagles. And I feel like this game will have a very different look to it than the regular season one, in which the Eagles just ran roughshod all over LA to the tune of a 37-20 victory, with Saquon Barkley rushing for just over 250 yards and for 2 touchdowns. But ultimately, LA did improve over time, got healthier as well. And even though in that game, Puka Nacua did play with their leading receiver, I feel like this time around, it's more about the mental side of things. They overcame the barrier, the emotionality of that game in Arizona and against the Minnesota Vikings, and truly trounced one of the best teams on the NFC side of the bracket. A 14-win wildcard team they were able to take down. And so going into this one, they have a lot of confidence, and they're not afraid anymore of a team like Philly, who completely shut them down in the regular season. On the Philadelphia side of things, I kind of feel like in their wild card matchup against the Packers, things were a little bit too disjointed. They could have completely run away with this game, but there were some tentative moments where they didn't take full advantage of everything the Packers were giving them. Even when the Packers were down there are a couple of receivers, even when they kept on losing offensive linemen, you kind of felt like this game, if the Packers even had one or two players fully healthy, that they didn't in this matchup, then it would have felt a lot closer. And so, looking at this game on paper, it's a lot more evenly matched up than people might realize. The Rams, I do feel, have the defense and the ability to generate pressure that is needed against this Philadelphia Eagles offensive line that has been so excellent all year long. And I also feel like Matthew Stafford is the perfect leader of this offense, because he's not going to do anything silly in terms of pushing the ball down the field like what Jordan Love was attempting to do in the wild card round. He's a much more conservative guy, and he's going to take what the Eagles give him. Now, I know it's going to be a little bit more painful in terms of scoring points than what you were able to do against the Vikings, but I do think that points could be had for Los Angeles in the game, unlike what the Packers were up against, because of the health. The health is the biggest difference here, because I feel like we'd be talking about a very different game in the wild card round between the Packers and the Eagles if the Packers were fully healthy. Because while the Eagles have been so excellent, perhaps the best team in many people's opinions in the NFC, they're a little bit vulnerable in terms of how you can attack them. on the offensive side of the football, just ask a lot of Jalen Hurts. Pressure him a lot and make him uncomfortable as a passer, and chances are you can potentially turn the ball over, force them behind the sticks, what have you. On the defensive side of things, I just feel like teams are a little bit too ambitious with how they play call against the Eagles. I feel like if you establish a dominant running game, which the Rams are kind of a little iffy on, it all depends on the play of Kyren Williams on that given day, but they can still get it going. And I think Kyren Williams is going to be a huge factor in both the running attack and the receiving game as well for Los Angeles. But ultimately, if you establish that run game, keep the linebackers who have been excellent all year long on their toes, then chances are a couple things will open up in the passing game. And since Matthew Stafford is more of an expert distributor than a downfield threat, he'll really appreciate that. He's not going to win this game just by throwing deep shots to Kupp and Nacua. He's going to win this game by sustaining drives and putting up points in that manner. And then the Eagles side of things. If you're approaching this game, I feel like the one aspect that you don't want to happen if you're the Eagles is Jalen Hurts getting blitzed like all hell. Because that means this Rams defense is generating the pressure they need to overwhelm you up front. Because this Philadelphia Eagles offensive line has run the gamut of facing aggressive opposing defenses. What they've done so well is adapt to the needs of this offense. It's a very run-heavy approach there in Philly, and even though Kellen Moore is a very ambitious offensive coordinator at times, he is more inclined and more comfortable, most importantly, running the football and establishing their dominance that way. But there are going to be situations in this game where Jalen Hurts is going to be asked to make a throw. And so if you aren't establishing your dominance up front, it stems all the way down to your backfield and most importantly your quarterback. Because this Rams front is a little bit different than what you faced in the regular season all those weeks ago. This Rams front is motivated, it's young, and most importantly, it's hungry. This was a team that was seen as down and out 5 weeks into the season when they were 1-4. 9 weeks into the season when they were 3-6. But now they look revitalized, rejuvenated, and even in the face of all the emotions of how their city has been affected and the emotions of having to play their game away from their home stadium, they have gotten to this point, the sheer grit and resilience of this very talented young defense. And so when I think about what the Rams can be able to do with guys like Verse and Fisk up front, and how the secondary can hold up with guys like Witherspoon and Kinchins in the secondary, I feel like this is going to be a much tougher task for Jalen Hurts to stay on schedule than, say, against a Green Bay Packers defense that really was a little bit too depleted to keep up with him. But ultimately, I think that this game comes down to both running backs here. If Saquon gets off on the right foot, gets into his usual rhythm, then chances are this Rams defense will look a bit slower than they did against Minnesota when Minnesota could not establish the run and Aaron Jones simply did not have the running lanes needed to create an impact in that regard. If Saquon can be the exact opposite of what Jones was, then this game has a chance to really get out of hand for the Rams, and they're going to have to be playing catch-up a lot of the time in it. But I can envision a game where both running backs are equally as important. I can see Kyren Williams being the guy in short yardage situations, whether it be running or receiving, being the difference maker as to how the Rams can extend and sustain drives and, most importantly, put up points. Because let's be real here. The Eagles are a team that on any given day can put up 30 to 40 points a game. But there are also days when they're so reliant on the run game that they don't necessarily put up as many points as you think. And that's what happened against Green Bay a little bit. they were focused on getting Saquon going. And yes, while Hurts made some timely throws that were the difference ultimately in that game, they really, really, really wanted to establish their dominance up front, which against the Packers defense is all fine and dandy because they are more known for generating takeaways than their pass rush, even though their pass rush was exceptional to finish the season. But the Rams really do entrust their pass rush and their front to get home a lot of the time. A lot of these guys are the difference makers for this defense. And yes, those secondary players who I discussed are highly capable of creating takeaways. But I do think that if you're Philly, the best way to stay on schedule is through the run game and for Saquon really wearing that defensive front of LA down. But in terms of predictions, I feel like this game is a little bit easier to predict than some of the others just because I feel like you know the difference Saquon can make in this game, whereas other players across other games, you don't necessarily know who's going to be important one way or the other. But I do know that Saquon is the hugest difference in this game, and what he's able to do for this Philadelphia Eagles offense is not only keep them on schedule, but score at ease himself. And that's the difference, I think, in a game where both defenses are going to come out hot. So, therefore, give me the Eagles in a very low-scoring affair. I kind of see this as a 17-13, 21-17 type of game where Saquon scores 2 touchdowns. The Rams' defense keeps it close, but potentially forcing a couple takeaways. But at the end of the day, it's Saquon closing it out on the ground just because of his utter dominance in that department. But I think this game could swing either way if Kyren Williams could get going on the opposite side of things for LA. But ultimately, I just think Saquon is too much of an X factor in this one for me to ignore him. But let me know what you think about this game, because coming up next we switch over to the AFC, talking about the last game of the divisional round, the popcorn-worthy event of the weekend perhaps, Bills-Ravens, Lamar versus Josh. An MVP decider, perhaps? Well, they've already voted, but who knows? We'll find out who I think is going to take this one right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.